prompt. So we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to put this on Facebook Live. I want to take a quick second and just thank everybody for showing up tonight. Hold on, sorry. It's this Facebook Live stuff. Loudoun County, go live. Okay. So thank you everybody for joining us this evening. We have Jillian with us from Roots to Revolution, and she is going to be getting into some of the nitty gritty on Project 2025. I am happy to see that it has taken a lot more of the media by storm lately. So it does feel like that word is getting out, and I appreciate all of you coming here tonight to learn some more about it. So Jillian.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jillian, and just a little bit about me, so you know where I'm coming from and a little bit about why I'm here talking to you about this today. So I am from Brooklyn, New York, and I've been a teacher for 16 years. I've worked with middle school students, high school students, undergraduates, graduate students who were training to be teachers. And in 2020, I started this organization called Roots to Revolution because what I was seeing was many people were outraged by the death and murder of George Floyd, but did not know how to get involved in activism. And they did not know the history of systemic racism in America. And so my colleagues and I founded Roots to Revolution to teach people about the history of systemic racism, and not only to teach people about that, but how to foster activism against it. And so, you know, I've really found that my talents is helping people really break down hard concepts. And I hope that tonight, with us talking about Project 2025, I can make something that is pretty complex and pretty overwhelming feel accessible to all of you, and that you can then go on and talk to others about that. And so I think that history is a really important tool for us to think about when we think about the present. And why look to the past when I'm worried about the future? So I would love for some people, and I do love to like ask questions throughout the presentation. So I would love for some people in the chat to just put if you recognize who these two historical figures are. And if you don't know, that's okay. But if you do recognize them, if you could share their names in the chat. All right. Thanks, Alex. Seeing a not so sure. It's totally fine. Thanks, Christy. All right. A lot of us identified Frederick Douglass. This is a picture of Frederick Douglass, and Frederick Douglass was one of the most photographed men of the 19th century. He was a famous abolitionist. He wrote the newspaper, the North Star, and he self-emancipated, meaning that he ran away from enslavement and got himself free, and went on to publish his narrative, went on to publish many works about his life. He met with President Lincoln and told President Lincoln that the war needed to be more focused on abolition, and convinced Abraham Lincoln in many ways to change his views along with other abolitionists. Abraham Lincoln originally thought that it was the job that Black Americans should go to Africa, should go back to Liberia. And he was part of a group, Lincoln, known as the American Colonization Society, and wanted Black Americans to go back to Africa. And Frederick Douglass taught him that that was not the right way, that people should be emancipated in the United States, and the United States should allow Black Americans to gain citizenship. The picture next to him is one that's not as commonly known, and that is his wife, Anna Murray Douglass. And Anna Murray was born a free woman, and she helped finance Frederick Douglass's freedom to emancipation. And I wanted to highlight these two individuals for a few minutes, for a few reasons. One reason is that I truly believe that liberation always starts with love. And I think that our example here really highlights that. And how that applies to us is if we're going to fight for a better democracy, we're going to do that through our communities. We're going to do that through our relationships, and we're going to do it on behalf of the people we love, the rights we love, and it has to start with love. It has to start from a place of love. I really do believe the best activism and the most sustainable activism starts with love at the center. What I also think is powerful about the story that I keep in mind is sometimes I find it hard as an ordinary citizen to think, what can I do to make this country better? And I think about historical figures like Frederick Douglass, who had everything on the line and were able to sit in front of someone like Abraham Lincoln and convince them of their humanity. And I think if Douglass can do something like that, then I can go out and talk to people about Project 2025. So historical figures like this, they give me courage. They give me a lot of deep courage. And what I also think about when I think about historical figures and social movements for change, in this case, the abolitionist movement, the greatest movement in our history to abolish slavery, there are so many people who are not pictured, so many people who will never be known in the textbooks that fought against slavery. And I think of myself as one of those people. Probably not going to make it into the textbooks. I'm probably never going to be famous, but ordinary citizens every day are the ones that have made change. Of course, there are heroes. Of course, there are people we celebrate, but it's us who bring on the change. And it's us who are going to make democracy safe. And we have to remember that ordinary citizens have a deep amount of power. Frederick Douglass's newspaper, the North Star, had over 4,000 subscribers at the time. We'll never know their names, but those people fought for abolition just like he did. And so I think it's important that we look to people in the past to inspire us. And I always like to start with Frederick Douglass when I think of that. He's one of my most famous favorite historical figures. And this is a quote from Douglass that I think also really summarizes the moment that we're in. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And what I take away from this writing here is that we are going to be the change. We cannot wait for anyone to come and save our democracy. It's going to be us, ordinary citizens, saving it. It's not going to be easy, and that's how activism works. And when we know it's not easy, that's how we know we're making progress. And so I want us to keep that in mind as we look at some of these policies and look at some of the things that are going to be present in Project 2025. Okay. So another thing I want to talk about too, as we think about this, because what I'm going to be calling on you to do at the end of this conversation is to be taking action. And you are already part of this group, the Democrats, the London County Democrats. So you are already people who are taking action. So that is fantastic. And I think what I do want us to just keep in mind, though, are some things about activism that you probably already know. Social movements do not have just one person leading the movement, and that is a myth about activism, that there is one hero who's going to swoop in and make everything better. We have to be united as groups of people, large groups of people have to spread the message about Project 2025. It can't just be one person who's going to make it better for everybody. Social movements, another myth about social movements is that they are without tension. We're going to talk to people about Project 2025 and we're going to spread the message about it. And those conversations are not going to necessarily be easy, because people, when we talk about politics, it's not an easy thing in this country. And so we have to accept that that's the way it's going to be. And we also have to accept the tension of not remaining silent. It might feel more comfortable to remain silent and say, oh, I know that person disagrees with me, so I'm not going to bring this up with them. But we have to take those leaps. We have to talk about it. We have to spread the word about this because our democracy depends on it. Another myth about activism is that social movements happen accidentally. They do not. We need to be planning in the next 4 months to really make sure we're getting the word out and getting the vote out. And we need to be very strategic with our time, strategic with our resources, and strategic with who we're talking to. Progress does not happen accidentally. Another myth about activism is that social movements are short-term and not ongoing. I'm going to say this because I'm a Democrat. When we get a Democrat elected, which will likely be Kamala Harris, we are going to still have to fight. Because when I think about Barack Obama and the white backlash that happened after his presidency, it was so extreme. That's where we are right now. We're seeing a ton of backlash to his presidency. And so when we get a Democrat elected, there is going to be backlash. And so we have to stay involved in activism. We have to stay a part of the fight. We cannot necessarily back down. We need to stay engaged. It's not just getting us to November. There's still so much more work that needs to be done after November. And I put these two examples up there. I often explain that the Rosa Parks story is told that she accidentally sat down on the front of a bus in Montgomery. That's how the myth is told in children's books. But the reality is that the bus boycotts were intentionally planned and coordinated over a period of 16 months, and thousands of people participated in boycotting the buses in Montgomery. And so we need to remember that about activism, and then we need to remember the reality that we are the ones who will save democracy. And what I'm going to outline to you about Project 2025 is that it is a huge threat to our democracy. It is probably one of the biggest threats to our democracy that we have faced in the history of our country. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. And so I want everyone to just kind of like take a deep breath. You know, this isn't going to be easy to listen to, but we're gonna talk through it and support one another. So Project 2025 was written by the Heritage Foundation. And the Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank that has been around since the Reagan administration. Many of the people who work for the Heritage Foundation go on to be policy advisors for many other presidents. They are open, because they are a think tank, to also advising Democratic presidents, but Democratic presidents usually do not ever ask for their policy advice. So because they are a conservative think tank. These are some of the things that the Heritage Foundation has done in the past. So during the Reagan administration, they spent time reducing the power of the federal government. They supported the Gulf War. They supported the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. They were in huge defense of the interrogation techniques at Guantanamo Bay. And if you remember at the time, the things that were happening to people at Guantanamo were some of the most horrific civil rights abuses we've seen done by the United States government. They're very much against universal health care. And so when Clinton tried to propose universal health care in the 90s, they made sure that that program was successfully shut down, which is why we didn't get the Affordable Care Act until the Obama administration. And they also have brought up many challenges against the Obama administration. What exactly is Project 2025? So it's a book called The Mandate for Leadership, which is a 900-page plus policy document that outlines what the goals of the next conservative president should be. The Heritage Foundation also has started a database of people who they want to work with the Trump administration should he be elected. And so they're prepping for that initial moment when he gets elected. And why they're doing that is because they know that the first Trump administration was very chaotic because Donald Trump is an incompetent leader. So Donald Trump was not able to execute on any of the things that the conservative agenda wanted. And what they want to avoid this time is that bumbling through the government, and they want to make sure that conservative policies are enacted quickly. That wouldn't be so scary if the policies they were proposing were moral or ethical or not, quite frankly, downright dangerous. And so some people will say, well, this is just a transition project. This is not a bad thing. It wouldn't be a bad thing to be preparing to help the president transition if it weren't for what's in this document. And we're going to get there in a moment. So Donald Trump on July 5th said that he knew nothing about Project 2025. And you can read his tweet that is up there that he posted on what is now X. I don't know. if you are familiar with this, but he went back and forth saying that he understands what it is, but he's not connected to it. Here is the reality. So if someone asks you this, you have the answer. Project 2025, the mandate for leadership, the Republican National Platform, and Agenda 47, which is Trump's campaign platform, are all distinct documents. However, they all have very similar ideas, and many of them overlap. And so it's really just semantics when he's arguing that he doesn't know about it or that he's not connected to it. It's frankly ridiculous that he says he's not connected to it, because many of his advisors from his first term wrote the policies that are in Project 2025. He also has chosen a vice president candidate in J.D. Vance, who is very closely connected to the Heritage Foundation. So J.D. Vance is close friends with the president of the Heritage Foundation, who recently said, America's second revolution will be bloodless if the liberals allow it. So these are not people who are distant from Trump. They are in his inner circle. And I would love for you to share in the chat, why do you think Trump would say he's not connected to Project 2025? What are some of your thoughts? Why would he pretend to say he's not connected to Project 2025? I'd love for you to share some of your thoughts in the chat. He never owns up again. Great. Okay. So I'm seeing two things that are resonating in the chat that are coming out, which is he lies about a lot. Trump is self-serving, so he will do whatever is convenient. And so we dig into, but Trump is strategic. And so what people are also saying is in the chat, which is true, is that the policies in it are deeply, deeply, deeply unpopular. And so what's fascinating about what the Republicans are doing right now is that they've created 900 pages of policies that they don't want to own up to because they're so awful. And that's what Trump is doing. That's exactly what he's doing here. He knows that if people know what's in this document, they are not going to vote for it. And I think that is a gift. And you're probably like, what? But I'll tell you why I think the mandate for leadership is a gift. I am a historian, and I use primary sources to teach my students. And primary sources are firsthand accounts, they're original documents. I think the mandate for leadership and Project 2025 is a gift for us because it's not Rachel Maddow's interpretation of what she thinks the Republicans are going to do. It's not, it's not the New York Times analysis in their editorial page. It's not the woke media, as we're called, right? It is the Republican platform written by the Republicans. And so when we show it to people, we need to just show them the document. And that's why it's a gift, because they have written out for us in plain, clear language exactly who they are and exactly what they want to do. And I find that extremely helpful, because when I talk to people about this, I say, this is not someone's liberal interpretation. This is what Trump and his supporters want. This is your people. When I talk to Republicans, I say, this is your people. Now, something that's really powerful to substantiate what all of you already know, but hopefully this motivates you. NPR did a survey of people who understood the Project 2025 platform, and only 18% said they supported the policies that are in Project 2025. Here's the work that we need to do. Only 70% of the American public is aware of what's in Project 2025. Only 70% of the public is aware of what's in Project 2025. So what does that mean for us? It means we must talk about it. We must talk about it with everyone we know, and we must do it every day until the election. And the more we do that, the better we are going to fare this election, and the more we're going to get our rights. So let's get into it. So these are the 4 stated goals of Project 2025 directly from the document. And I think what's important to share with folks about the goals is that some of these goals are in coded language. And so they don't seem so bad, and they're written in such a way that doesn't seem so negative, but they actually have very negative repercussions. So when I look at the first one, it says, restore the family as a centerpiece of American life and protect our children. That doesn't seem bad. I'm a teacher. I want to protect children. I like my family. But what do the policies go on to say? What the policies go on to say in the document is that the family is a heterosexual one. The family is one between a man and a woman. Women who are single shouldn't raise children on their own because that's not the American family. And so what does this mean in reality is they want to dismantle the lives of families that are not heteronormative. They want to take away IVF for women who maybe want to have children on their own or have children later in life. Or they want to take away IVF because gay families can use IVF and surrogacy to have children. And so this is not a positive thing. This one, and I think for many of you who are on this call who live in Virginia, the second one is also really important to you about they want to dismantle the administrative state, meaning they want to gut the federal bureaucracy. And they want to not only gut the workers in the federal bureaucracy, but replace them with people who are highly partisan. And so that list that I was talking about earlier, that they're compiling of people to join the administration in the Heritage Foundation database, they want to put those into positions of the bureaucracy. And when I think about my friends who have worked in the State Department or work for the Environmental Protection Agency or the emergency management agencies, they have worked through several different administrations. And first and foremost, my friends who work for those agencies, their concern is to protect the country, to protect the mission of the agency. It is, of course they vote partisan outside of the agency, but it's not, it's not to be acting as a partisan person. And that is critical because we can't have members of the Environmental Protection Agency acting in a partisan manner. We need people in the Environmental Protection Agency making decisions based on science. I don't want the people in the education department making decisions based on partisanship. I want them making decisions based on what is best for teachers and for students and for pedagogical decisions that help kids learn. So that's why that is so destructive. The third one, talking about our nation's sovereignty and borders and against global threats. We have seen this fascism start in 2016 with Trump, the way he has scapegoated immigrants as the reason for America's problems. And that is a sign of fascism, right? A key cornerstone of fascism is when a leader takes a group and demonizes them and says that the society's problem is because of that group. And so while we certainly do need immigration reform as a country, and I don't think it's helpful for us to deny that we need immigration reform. We do need immigration reform. We need better support services for our immigrants when they get here. There's a lot of things we need to be doing, but they certainly aren't the reason why Americans have the problems that they do. And what I think oftentimes is that, you know, we have billionaires in this country who are accumulating wealth at just astronomical rates, but we're telling people that we can't care for our homeless and for our immigrants. We can. There's enough money in the world to eliminate poverty tomorrow if our billionaires came together to do it, but they're not choosing to do that. So it's not helpful to pit groups of low-income people, low-income immigrants and low-income Americans in the United States against one another. And that's what the Republican Party is doing by saying that they're the source of our problems. And then the last one, you know, I think that this really is where we start to see this melding between church and state. Thomas Jefferson deeply believed in the separation of church and state. The founders of this country believed in the separation of church and state. And what we see in Project 2025 is this desire to move towards a Christian nationalist theocracy. And what I say about a lot of the Republicans in the party today is they are banning Black and queer history, and then they are bastardizing white history. And what I mean by that is we have called for bans against books that teach Black history. We have called for bans that against books that teach LGBTQ history, that ban women's history. And so they're trying to censor that information. And then at the same time, they are erasing the true legacy of some of our white founding fathers, right? There were our founding fathers did not want America to be a theocracy. That is the opposite of what they believed in and what they called for. And so that's what we're seeing here in this last one when they say the blessings of liberty is this desire to have a theocracy. So a part of this that is very dangerous, Project 2025, is this idea of unitary executive theory. And if you're talking to other people about it, you know, what I recommend is like, you don't have to necessarily remember what unitary executive theory, that exact term. But what you do need to remember is that what the aim of Project 2025 is to do is to consolidate more power into the executive branch. We've already seen a consolidation of presidential power with the decision that came out of the Supreme Court giving President Trump immunity. So if the former President Trump were to be in the White House again, and then we have coupled with Project 2025, we're going to have him have quite a bit of power. That would be extremely dangerous. And what they want to do is give the executive more control over the federal government with less approval and influence from Congress. And so the president would not need congressional approval to nominate people to positions of power, like, for example, the Secretary of State. And so, you know, the other things that would happen is it would give the president more power over branches like the military and the Justice Department. The president is the commander-in-chief for the military, but the military is required to act in best interests of the United States and also has its own set of rules and regulations. What Project 2025 is calling on is to eliminate that separation and to give the president full control over the military. Trump has said on multiple occasions, he says it in Agenda 47 on his website, so you can direct people directly to it, that he would like to use the military to go after anyone who protests his election. He wants to use the military against his own citizens. We have seen Trump also do this before. During the summer of 2020, when there were people protesting George Floyd's murder, he sent the military in against those protesters. So, you know, this is not something that we need. It is not the purpose of what the military is supposed to do. And that is what he wants to use it for. Unitary executive theory also is to gut the federal bureaucracy, which I mentioned before, and then to eliminate nonpartisan civil service and replace with partisan civil services. So, you know, this is scary. And I think what's also really important to think about is making sure that he also doesn't have control of Congress. So a lot of people right now are very focused on the presidential election, and you as people who are politically engaged understand that we're voting down the ballot, and that we need to make sure we have people in Congress, in the Senate, in the House, in our state houses that can push back on these things. Hopefully we do just elect a Democratic president, but if we don't, we need to make sure there are checks and balances against him. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some policy recommendations, and I saw someone mention this in the chat that the culture wars are just distractions to get rid of public education, and I 100% agree with that. So the culture wars are, in many ways, you know, making up fabrications about teachers, and we, you know, need to understand what Project 2025 will do to education. So it will eliminate the Federal Department of Education and eliminate Title I funding. So if you're not familiar with Title I funding, what that is it's funding for low-income schools, because we already have a racist and segregated school system in which funding is based on property taxes. Already the schools that are in low-income neighborhoods are vastly and drastically underfunded compared to their white counterparts in more affluent neighborhoods. There's already a huge gap between schools. And so if you eliminate Title I funding, you will make that gap insurmountable to pass through. So I work for a district that receives Title I funding, New York City Public Schools, and New York City, their budget receives 10% is Title I funding. So you can imagine if the Federal Department of Education is eliminated and Title I funding is eliminated and 10% of our budget is cut, that will cause teachers to lose their job. That will cause probably some schools to have to shut down and consolidate. And that will also, you know, cause teachers to be even more overwhelmed. Right now, there's a national teacher shortage. And so should schools become more overwhelmed and more overcrowded, teachers are going to be even less able to do their jobs. And what that does is it paves the way for Republicans to say, see, public schools don't work. What we need is vouchers. What we need is more charter schools. What we need is more private schools. And then they can funnel tax dollars, which they've already been doing, more vastly to those schools. Another thing that is important to think about is they're going to increase the power of ICE and arrest and detain immigrants and create concentration camps for immigrants. That is also something that Trump directly states on his website. For Homeland Security, the plan is to privatize TSA, which I think, you know, we need government agencies running things like that protect us and keep us safe. They also want to reduce the FEMA budget. So when we have natural disasters, as you know, FEMA goes in and supports with those natural disasters. So in a time when we're seeing more and more effects of climate change, that is definitely a huge issue. They want to eliminate the ability of US aid to provide relief for people suffering from climate change and to also cut workers from the EPA. They also want to eliminate all funding for NPR and PBS and to increase surveillance of foreign journalism. So what I want for people to do, just to pause here for a moment, take a deep breath, internalize what we're seeing here. And I just want you to share in the chat, based on what you know about history, which of these are tenets of fascism? What are some of the ways in which fascist governments in the past, what do you see here that is similar to other fascist governments that have arisen or other times in US history when there's been examples of fascism? What is similar to what you see here? Great, I'm seeing a lot of things in the chat.
Jillian, for our viewers on Facebook, could you just verbalize some of these responses?
Sure, yep. So some of the things that I'm seeing that most definitely are tenets of fascist governments is picking a group to be a scapegoat. Another is to eliminate education. Another is to demonize the press. So what we're seeing here, a lot of these policies are all tenets of fascist nations. And, you know, I think one of the things that when we think about the Holocaust, that's important to understand is the concentration camps were the last step. There were many things that happened prior to the concentration camps. And one of those things was Hitler burned history textbooks. And so, you know, I know people in this group have already expressed that they're concerned about book banning and all those things that, you know, that is a huge step that we were already seeing undergoing in our country. That is a huge problem. And so, you know, these are things we need to be aware of, that we need to explain to people, because people, you know, fascism sounds very existential. And fascism is about control, yes, but it's about very specific types of control. So asking people to wear a mask because it protects public health is not a fascist tenet. But decreasing the power of women, scapegoating a group of people, you know, eliminating education, eliminating the power of press, those are tenets of a fascist government. Fascism is more than just control. So some other things that I want to talk about that are also part of this is they want to revive the Comstock laws of the 1870s. The Comstock laws were pretty obscure. Nobody really heard about them until about like last year when they started to come back into conversation. And Anthony Comstock was a conservative man. He was a postal worker who he proposed this law that you could not disseminate information about birth control through the mail. In the 1870s, the information about birth control was paper information. People were just sharing things about how to track ovulation. There was, you know, limited forms of birth control. It was very different than what we have now, but women were thinking about it. Women were also getting abortions in the 1870s. And what I think is something that's worth noting, because all of this is very much connected to white supremacy, is that in the 1870s, one of the reasons why groups of people started to promote anti-abortion laws is connected to the Civil War. So I'd love for someone in the chat to share, how is banning abortions, how do you think that's connected to the Civil War? Civil War ended in 1865. You see these laws against birth control coming up in the 1870s. How is that connected to the Civil War? See, you need more workers, not sure. Okay. So once the Civil War ended, Black Americans were free. Black Americans could no longer be enslaved. And what white Americans were afraid of, not all white Americans, but many of them were afraid there was going to be a shortage of white children. They were afraid that Black women were going to have too many children and that Black people were going to outnumber and outvote whites. And so they started to pass anti-abortion laws after the Civil War because they wanted to make sure white women had children. And so I want us to keep that in mind because we're still seeing that same white supremacy today. Tucker Carlson was on Fox News many times talking about this idea of the great replacement theory, right? I see Barry just took the word in the chat, the great replacement theory. And so I think that is really important for us to understand how this is connected to white supremacy. You will hear a lot of things in the news about how they're saying there isn't a national abortion ban written into Project 2025. And technically there isn't. Technically. But it is written into Project 2025 that they want to give embryos 14th Amendment rights. What would happen if we give embryos 14th Amendment rights? Can someone share into the chat? The 14th Amendment provides equal protection under the law. So if we give embryos 14th Amendment rights, what would happen? Seeing Elizabeth saying they could call it murder. What else? Could you have an abortion? There would be an abortion ban, right? So they criminalize abortion, yes. So this is where, again, it's semantics. So by saying that you want to give embryos 14th Amendment rights, you're not technically saying there would be an abortion ban, but you are saying there would be an abortion ban, because if an embryo has equal rights under the law, you can't abort it. And so there would be a national abortion ban, and there would be the opportunity to criminalize women for abortions. There would be the opportunity to criminalize women for miscarriages. So I think that is also something we need to pay close attention to. It also calls for elimination of the progressive income tax to lower the corporate tax rate lower than it already is, and raise the tax rate on middle and low income families. They also want to increase foreign tariffs. The tariffs is a tax on foreign goods, which this is like basic econ policy 101. Anytime you increase foreign tariffs, you drive up inflation. So many Americans right now are suffering from inflation. They're living paycheck to paycheck. And we're finally getting to a place where inflation is going down. And now we are going to see if they increase foreign tariffs, inflation is going to get driven up. They also want to eliminate the language prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender discrimination, and gender identity from the law. So they want to say that sexual orientation is not a legal term. They want to say gender discrimination is not a legal term. Gender identity is not a legal term. What that sets us up to do is to make it legal to discriminate against people on the basis of sexual orientation and gender. The proposal also calls to end interracial marriage, and the proposal calls to end gay marriage. So I think what I want to also talk about a little bit here is, and we're going to do Q&A, so I don't think we actually have a ton of time to watch this video, but why would we eliminate PBS and Elmo and all these things is, you know, like, because I think about that, PBS is where we watch Sesame Street. And what do they care about Sesame Street? Well, when I think about like a program is simply, and this is how I think you can simply state this to other people. When I think about a program like Sesame Street, it teaches kids to love people. It teaches kids to connect with other people who are different than them. And what does interracial marriage do? When I think about what interracial marriage does for a family, is it brings different cultures together to become one family. And that decreases racism. What I said earlier, right? Love equals liberation. When you have someone in your family who comes out as gay, maybe there were some family members who were homophobic, and now there's someone in the family who's gay and they start to understand gay culture and they're no longer homophobic. And so if we eliminate gay marriage, if we eliminate interracial marriage, if we eliminate the things that bring people together, then we can maintain white supremacy. And I think I keep going back to that. And I started this conversation saying I start Roots to Revolution because of, you know, trying to teach people about the dangers of white supremacy. And the goal of Project 2025 is to consolidate power into the hands of rich white men. And the policies will bring us back to the 1870s. So all the things we fought for, civil rights, women's rights, gay liberation, American Indian liberation, the movements of the 60s, those were all movements in the 60s. All the things we're fighting for today will be erased by this and bring us back to the time of the Civil War. And if anyone tries to deny that to you when they're talking to you about it, you can point to the law, to the document. And that's why I say it's a gift. You can point back to this document and say, it's right in the document. And I think that what's really important about this moment for us is that we have an opportunity as citizens. This is our civil rights fight. This is our moment to change history as citizens. And I think that we have a country that's full of really beautiful democracy and really beautiful diversity, and that is worth saving. I mentioned this earlier. Only 16% of Americans approve of what these policies are, and approve of the policies in Project 2025. And sorry, the last one has an error in it. Thank you. I'll fix that. And only 70% of Americans know what is in Project 2025 is what that should say. And so it's important to us for really getting the word out, making sure that we tell people, because only 70% of Americans have even heard of Project 2025. And thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so I think one of the biggest things we can do is have conversations with loved ones, families, friends, neighbors about what's in this document and talk to them about it. It is shown that community organizing really makes gains in elections. That is how Barack Obama won his election. It is how AOC won her election. It's how many politicians are, on the grassroots are winning elections. And it is also shown that it's really powerful to talk to people about politics. Because yeah, a stranger who calls you for phone banking or canvassing, that's really powerful too. But if it's someone that's really important. They'll listen to you, right? And they'll care about you. Yes, Barbara, are you saying 70%? No, 70% of people do not know about Project 2025. 70% of Americans do not know about Project 2025 is what that bullet was saying. So what I'm saying is, I think our biggest charge as people, and thank you for clarifying, our biggest charge as people is we need to get the word out about this. We need to tell people that, this is happening. Okay. And so what are the ways that I think we can talk about people and politics is I think we have to make politics about people. And I don't think it's about scaring people. I don't think it's about shaming people. I don't think it's about hyperbole or dramatizing things. But I do think that we need to personalize it. And so I'm going to give you an example of how I personalize Project 2025 and talk about it with people who I want to explain it to. So my mother is pictured in that picture. It's me, my mom, and my sister in Paris. And my mother was diagnosed with a disease called mesothelioma when I was 22. And it was my first year teaching, and she got sick, and she was a really strong woman. She had been through a whole lot in her life, and she was a really big force and just like a really big presence. And she went in for surgery for her gallbladder, and they found this cancer all over her abdomen, and it was mesothelioma. And mesothelioma is caused by a carcinogen known as asbestos. Well, this cancer just knocked her out. And we thought she was going to beat it, but only 200 people in the United States at the time, I think, had it. There was like only one doctor in Maryland that would even do surgery on her. So we were living in New York. We brought her down for surgery, but within 9 months, mesothelioma took her life. And during the Trump administration, he released bans on asbestos. He made it easier for people to use asbestos. And when Biden took over the EPA, he reinstated all the workers that Trump cut from the EPA. And I think about Project 2025, if they cut even more workers from the EPA, there's going to be less opportunity for people to get rid of harmful carcinogens like asbestos. And for the first time in our history, which seems too late, but Asbestos was banned in the United States. That happened under the Biden administration. That happened under the EPA, his EPA. And when I saw this headline, I was just thrilled because I knew that more people will not die the way my mother had to die, that they won't get cancer from asbestos. And a lot of people who get mesothelioma are working class people who do construction because they're around the chemical. And so when I think about, it might just seem like, oh, what's the big deal? You cut a few people at the EPA, we make our government more efficient. But it is a big deal because the more people you have working there, the better we can make sure that there aren't harmful chemicals being out there. And so politics are about people. And I think when we talk to people about Project 2025, we have to make sure that we tell them about how these policies are going to impact us. Now, my mom's story is, I think, maybe, more rare. Maybe not everyone has like that kind of story to tell. And that's okay. And so maybe the stories that you tell though are more simple, which is just, I have friends that are gay and I don't want their marriage to be dissolved. My friends who are gay have adopted children, and if they don't have marriage rights, then what happens to their children? They'll lose their adoption rights to their children, and I don't want their families broken apart. These are the things we have to say when we talk about these policies, because it's important for people to understand it can happen here, and it can happen to us, and it can happen to the people we love. Because when people hear about these things, they do get scared. And then their defense mechanism is, oh, that's not really going to happen. Or that might happen to someone else, but it's not going to happen to me. So we have to bring it closer to them. And we have to make them understand. And I think we also have to give them hope in that, what a beautiful thing that with adding more workers to the EPA, look what we were able to do. We're able to prevent more people from getting cancer. What a beautiful thing. Lives are being saved. That's a beautiful thing. And so it's not just about scaring people. It's about inspiring people too, about what the alternative is. Instead of gutting the federal Department of Education, how beautiful would it be to fully fund public education? What would that mean for our country? That our children can grow up having access to all types of things in their schools. What a beautiful thing. And what a beautiful thing for us as society, that our doctors will be smarter and our Uber drivers will be smarter and our teachers will have what they need to care for our children. So it's not just about saying to people the terrible things that are going to happen, but what are the beautiful things that can happen when we pass policy that is good? What I also want to talk about too is sometimes it's really hard to talk to people about racism. It's really hard to talk to people about politics. It's so much easier to just say, we're going to keep it separate. I know they disagree with me, and I'm just gonna let it be. We're just gonna not talk about this. I'm gonna talk to people who, I know agree with me, and we can't do that. We have to work on changing people's hearts and minds. I think it's really important that we prioritize, like I said a few times throughout this presentation, 70% of Americans have never heard of Project 2025. So prioritize the people in your lives who probably agree with you, because they probably haven't heard of this. But then you also need to have hard conversations with the Trump supporters, because the root of this project is connected to white supremacy. And white supremacy won't go away in November. And so we have to have hard conversations about racism in this country, because this is going to be our fight until we have those hard conversations, until we change people's minds. And I want to just give you, I have two pictures here of things that motivate me when I'm finding it hard to have difficult conversations. This one picture is a group of my friends all together from, it was my birthday. And I was like, just thinking about how beautiful the day was, and just how lucky I was to just like on a peaceful Sunday, just like be with my friends and just be at peace. And my friends that you see here, you know, some of them are in interracial marriages, some of them are in gay marriages, some of them, you know, are they're immigrants, and you know, I don't want my niece to have less rights than I have, and I just want them to be safe. And I love people. This will affect me. You know, I love deeply people who these laws will affect, and I don't want their life to be in pain. And so when I have a hard time having a hard conversation, I think about, who am I fighting for? And it's for the people I love and their future. I also want to bring up a story that I learned. I went to Lafayette College, and this is a picture of the Marquis de Lafayette. And if you don't know about Revolutionary history, he was sent to the United States from France to help train the American troops, and he helped us win the American Revolution. And he became very close friends with Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. And when he visited Thomas Jefferson, he told him that it was just an abomination that he wasn't teaching his enslaved people to read and write. He thought Jefferson was completely out of line. And he told him that he thought he needed to free his enslaved people. And as you know, when Jefferson died, he did not do that. And Jefferson only freed his children. And the Marquis de Lafayette also was good friends with Washington. And when Washington died, he did say that his enslaved people could be free if his wife allowed it. And his wife did allow it. And scholars, Al Vernon, credit George Washington's shift in mindset to the Marquis de Lafayette, among other things. And what this story helps me remember about history and a few things is that we were always having hard conversations in America. There were always people fighting for justice at every period of time. And it must have been hard for him to have those conversations with Jefferson and Washington. He was a young man. He looked at Jefferson like a father and Washington like a father figure. And so it must have been very hard for him to talk about that, but he did anyway, because he knew it was right. And what I also think about this story that's important to me is, you are going to talk to people who don't change their minds, but you are also going to talk to people who do change their minds. And that's going to mean a huge difference for people's rights. And so I don't want you to give up, and I don't want you to back down from having those hard conversations. So I also just wanted to, you know, give you some homework and just thinking about, you know, what are some of the things that you can do in the future about this. Is you can really talk to, oh, my screen froze, there we go. You can start talking to your friends about Project 2025 and making sure that you're thinking about who are the people you want to reach. And every week you're going to talk to more people. And I think you're probably already doing this really well because you're in the Democratic group and you're organizing people, but registering young people to vote, becoming a poll worker, phone banking, spreading information, all that's going to help us win the election. So thank you so much. It's 8 o'clock, so I will take some questions. And Laura, I do know Diane Shaw from Lafayette, and she was always such a wonderful educator about the Marquis de Lafayette. I learned a lot from her. So please tell her I say hello. I don't know if she'll remember me, but I do remember her. Small world.
Jillian, if you don't mind, I'd like to read the questions out loud so our Facebook group can hear them.
Okay, let's do it. Yeah.
Take some time to answer them. So the first question is, what are the 3 things in Project 2025 that scares you the most, and why are these points? FYI, see page 26 of the July 22nd, 2024 New Yorker, very informative long article about Project 2025. And before you answer that, I do just want to put in a quick comment here, is that one of the things that I personally have been finding so empowering about this and people talking out about it is when they're actually posting the page numbers so that people can go back and fact check. So take it away.
Yeah, I think that's hard because there's a lot of it I think is pretty scary. But I think that the climate change, I think, is one of the biggest things on my mind. Because, you know, the UN predicted we only have about 11 years left to make sure that we don't catastrophically damage the planet. And there's no really coming back from that if we don't. And my friend is a scientist. She works for Arizona State University, and she is a professor, and she helped write the National Climate Report. She was one of 300 scientists that helped contribute to the National Climate Report. And we were talking the other day, and she said the Biden administration has done incredible things to fight climate change, so much so that the scientific community was surprised with how far the Biden administration went to fight climate change, and doing it in ways that also creates more jobs, and you know, all kinds of opportunities. And so you know, I think that is one of the things that scares me the most, is if we roll back those things and don't move ahead. And then Natalie is saying many less years and 11 years to act on climate change, which is reminding me that UN report was done in 2019. So Natalie, you are correct. It is less than 11 years. So in 2019, it was 11 years. So thank you, Natalie, for that. So I think that's one that scares me as a teacher. You know, I am very scared of the cuts to the education program. I have only worked in low-income schools, and we already have an apartheid school system. Nicole Hannah-Jones is famous for her work on the 1619 project, but prior to that, she did work on segregation in schools, and the United States education system is still very segregated. And so if we don't educate our populace, we can't make good decisions. And that's what, you know, really scares me about that. And, you know, I think this idea of moving America towards a dictatorship is also scary, because that will be hard for us to reverse. And so I think those are probably the scariest things for me.
So now that you've terrified us all,
Sorry.
the next question is, what is a good way to explain how this would affect children with special needs in IEP services? I know several moms of special needs kids that are MAGA, and I'd love to know the best way to explain that specifically.
That's a great question. So, you know, when we think about funding for schools with kids who have IEPs get additional funding. And so that's a great thing, because they need more support and more services, and they need to pay more people like paraprofessionals and counselors to support students. What I would say very simply is, if the goal of Project 2025 at the end of the day is to eliminate public education, that's the goal. If you're a mom, getting your kid to school, getting them ready for school, advocating for your kid with an IEP is already a full-time job. And I have a lot of respect for parents. And if we move to a voucher system, where now you have to research charter schools, you have to research private schools, you have to figure out which school has the services for your kids, that's very, very time consuming. And that's going to help make it really hard for you to find the right services for your kids, versus a well-funded public school that has all those services available to you. And charter schools with there's a difference. There's public charter schools and there's private charter schools. Public charter schools need to offer those services. Private schools aren't mandated to provide those services. And they can deny your child those services, or someone's saying in the chat, they can deny your child admission. And so that's going to make your job as a parent and making sure your child has the right things they need really impossible. In contrast, the Biden administration wants to put billions of dollars towards education and to counseling. And, something that kids really benefit from who have, learning needs is to talk to someone about it and to work through it and to, understand that. And so, a teacher who is, and if schools get closed because of Title I funding, which they'll have to close them because they'll have to fire teachers, and then we'll have to consolidate schools. And so now you'll have classrooms. I've taught classes as big as 30. Now you'll have classrooms with 40, 45, 50 kids. Well, I'm not going to be able to differentiate learning for your child with an IEP. I can differentiate learning when in a room with 30 kids, but I can't differentiate learning for a classroom with 50 kids in it. It's nearly impossible. And so you're not going to get the supports that you need, and your child's going to get under the radar. So I think that's a great question, and a way to talk about that with them.
Thank you for that. The next question we have is, what about the implementation of the Bible in school?
Yeah. So, I mean, what's wild about this is, like when I get stressed, my friends tease me when Jillian gets stressed, she always goes like this with her forehead. I wrinkle my, so this is, so in every state, I work in New York State, and in every state, usually around 6th grade, there is a requirement to teach world religions. It's in the state standards. So every school teaches like Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity. We teach the history of it. We teach Islam. We teach where these religions come from. We teach the similarities between them. We teach about the rituals. Like, it's already a part of the curriculum. So the fact that they say we need the Bible in schools is creating a problem that we don't have, because kids learn about the Bible in school, and kids learn about the Quran in school. Like, it's just not a thing. It's not an issue. It's a fake problem. And what it is, again, is Christopher Rufo is a conservative activist who is, his goal is to defund public education. And this is also in line with that goal. And I'll tell you why. Because what's going to happen is, if you say the teachers have to force to teach the Bible in school, what are you going to have? You're going to have teachers quit. And if you have teachers quit, schools are going to be less effective. And then what are you going to say? Oh, public schools don't work. We need to defund public schools. So first of all, it's a non-existent problem, because Christian kids are fully supported in schools. I also have worked in schools where there are prayer rooms so that kids can pray, and so there's like, this is not an issue. We're already providing these services for kids. And so it's creating a problem that we don't have. And I also think it's a distraction. So at the end of the day, I wouldn't like it, but if I had to work in the state of Louisiana, I'd put up a picture of the 10 Commandments like they're asking me to do, sure. And then I'd put up the Quran, and I'd put up the Torah, and I'd put up all the pictures in my corner. And then when the administrator comes in, and the reality is no administrator, they don't even come to our schools to make sure we're okay, let alone they're not going to come to schools for the 10 Commandments. So they're not going to check. So like, that's not really what I'm worried about. What I am worried about, though, is my budget. I am worried about getting rid of Title I funding, and that's what we're not really talking about. And so I do also want us to, like, I don't agree with the Bible being in schools. It's against the laws of the country. It's against First Amendment rights. But I do worry because I think it's a distraction from the real issue, which they're trying to defund public schools. And so I think that we need to really focus on that, and make sure our schools are fully funded and our teachers are supported and our kids have what they need, versus putting our energy and our resources towards this ridiculous law. But it is paving the way for a theocracy, which is what they also want. So it shouldn't be ignored. But if I was prioritizing what am I going after, it's not what I'm going after. What I'm going after is making sure that schools are funded. Personally, that's what I think. Great question.
Also a question in the chat that didn't make it to the Q&A, but I thought it was a really, really great one. So I just kind of wanted to bring it up here. Can the president eliminate the EPA, education department, et cetera, by executive order?
I don't think so. I would have to double check on that, but I think he would need approval of Congress, yeah, to do that. Because he needs approval from Congress to appoint people to the administrations.
Okay, and I actually had a question emailed to me, so give me just 1 second. Let me pull it up on my phone. Sorry about this. Okay, so a large number of Loudoun County residents are employed by the federal government and federal contractors. What would the restoration of Schedule F mean for them?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it absolutely puts your jobs on the line. You know, it's not clear to me. What I am afraid of is like this McCarthy era type like questioning of people and their loyalties and all those kinds of things where they were like, you know, if you're not familiar with the McCarthy era, he was, you know, calling people communists, but really what he was doing was expunging people from the government who were also Black civil rights activists, who were gay. There was something known as the Lavender Scare, where he, like, you know, and he questioned people's loyalty. So like if you were at a gay bar and they would publish the list, and the next day you would lose your job because then you were accused of being a communist. And so I fear that like there'll be some kind of like loyalty oath or something that you'd have to like sign, and then you could lose your job. I'd imagine that would be the direction that they would take. And I think it would take some time to, you know, figure that out. But I do think that, again, like as someone who works in public service, and I'm sure many of you who work in public service, like you certainly don't need your agency spending time on things like that. You don't need your agency spending time on like who's partisan and who's with us versus who's not. Like you have a million things to do and you're already overworked in public service. So like we don't need people spending time on figuring out who's loyal to the president and who's not. But yeah, it would definitely just very simply cause people to lose their jobs and be replaced by people from this list in the Heritage Foundation of people that are partisan agents. And I would imagine also the repercussions of that too would be a lot of lawsuits. And so then things would get tied up in the courts. I'm sure the ACLU would sue and other groups would sue. And my fear with that is not that you don't deserve to have a case, you certainly would, but then it's like, what are those groups? You know, those groups also have limited resources, not unlimited, limited resources. So if we're now spending time fighting for civil servants that should be in place in the first place, what are the things we're not fighting? And we're going to be fighting so many different battles with this. And so I think we need to just really be careful about making sure it doesn't come to fruition, because there's going to be a lot of this is all against the Constitution and it's going to go to the courts. And the court is also not in our favor. So we don't really have that to, you know, look upon us. So it's very dangerous.
So I do have one more question here, and it's about the Chevron doctrine. So the Chevron doctrine gave deference to federal agencies when they were ambiguous in legislation that they were implementing. The recent Supreme Court decision, Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo, overruled the Chevron doctrine. What impact does that have on the potential for implementing Project 2025?
It makes it easier. It certainly makes it easier. What is the bigger problem, I think, with the Chevron doctrine is it takes away authority from the people who know the most about certain issues to make changes. So, for example, if Congress makes a law about climate change and says, okay, we want everyone to use this new technology because it's going to help reduce carbon emissions. Well, in 4 years, that new technology could be obsolete, and we found a better technology to reduce carbon emissions. Well, the EPA can keep up with that a lot quicker than Congress can make laws around it. And so the Chevron doctrine says, okay, Congress can make laws about these issues, and they're the ones who need to stipulate things, but Congress purposely leaves some of these laws vague to let the experts decide what to do. I mean, there are many of our politicians who are brilliant, but like I've also talked to many politicians on the local level who don't know the ins and outs of education. How could they possibly, how could you possibly know the ins and out of every single specific issue? That's why you have advisors, that's why you have experts. And so I think the Chevron doctrine takes away that expertise and holds us back in terms of being innovative, and leaving power to people who can make decisions. And yes, it takes away authority from the federal agencies, and a lot of the federal agencies like the Justice Department, not the military isn't a federal agency necessarily, but like it's a distinctive branch, but like those groups will now have more power under the president. And so I think it's actually been very beneficial that they don't have that connection to the president. And so that's one of the problems with that decision. It's a very dangerous decision. And I think the other thing that we can do around that, because I don't want to leave people just feeling heartless, AOC and Jamie Raskin have brought up impeachment charges against Clarence Thomas. So one thing you can do is support those impeachment charges. Thomas was receiving gifts and money from companies that benefited from gutting the Chevron doctrine. So he was originally in support of it, and then he got all these gifts, and now he's all of a sudden overturning it. So that is something you can take, is we do have the power to impeach justices, and so that should be a step that we are doing. So one of the things you can do is call your congressional leaders and tell them you support ethics reform for the Supreme Court, and you support the impeachment proceedings for Clarence. You would like them to bring impeachment proceedings against Clarence Thomas.
So we just had a question submitted in the Q&A, and it says, what will happen to Project 2025 when Trump does not win the election?
I love the manifesting that he doesn't win. So this is why I think history is so important in understanding our current time. After the Civil War, when Reconstruction happened, thousands of Black Americans ran for office and got elected. And in 1877, Reconstruction ended because the federal troops were pulled out of the South, and all of that progress, like in many ways, went away. And Jim Crow laws were started, literacy tests were started, poll taxes were started. It was white backlash. In the 1920s, many Black men fought abroad in World War I. They came back home. They were armed. They knew how to fight. They were powerful. They were saying, we're fighting a war for democracy, but you're not giving us democracy here. There was the Harlem Renaissance. There was Black Americans achieving wealth. And that is when you also had a big period of white backlash. That's when the Tulsa riots happened. That's when there were, there was extreme lynchings happening. It was white backlash. When the Civil Rights Movement happened, you had all these achievements take place. There was white backlash. Nixon becomes president, reverses many of the gains in school integration. Reagan becomes president, starts the war on drugs, mass incarceration. Obama becomes president. The Me Too movement happens. We have gay rights increasing, with gay marriage being passed. And what do you have? Trump, white backlash. And so we live through these times where there's this constant, and I highly recommend the book by Carol Anderson. It's called White Rage, and she explains this very clearly. If Harris is elected, this will not go away. They will still be trying to push this agenda, and they will be, in my opinion, I think they'll be pushing it even harder, because not only will it be a Black person in office, so she's also Asian American, and she's a woman. So I think this will, in many ways, we will see many angry people, and I don't think this will go away. And that's why I keep talking about us saying we got to win the election, but we have to keep in it past the election, and we have to keep talking about racism, and we have to keep talking about undoing racism, and we have to keep having those hard conversations, because this will not go away, I do not think. And I don't think people want it, but I don't think the people in power are just going to give up on it. And so I think it's really important that we remember that. And, I gave these examples of history being difficult, but I also think we need to look to those people in those times who fought, because I always say that activists from the past give us a roadmap for the future. We don't learn. The reason why they're suppressing the history is because they don't want us to know what they did to fight back. You know, if we know the history, we know what tools to use, right? Those are our like leaders, those are our guides, and that's why they're suppressing the history, because they don't want us to learn what those powerful men and women and activists did. And so that's why it's so important we know our history. And I'm always happy to come back to do conversations about more historical topics if that's something you all need after we win the election. But I don't think this is going to stop.
Thank you so much. Thank you for agreeing to come out and do this. I was wondering if you could please maybe put your contact information or something in the chat, so that if someone has some questions or wants some more information that we just weren't able to get to this evening, they can reach out to you.
Absolutely. And what I have here is a document. This is basically what I went over tonight. Please, please, please feel free to share it. So it's all the recommendations in Project 2025. I mean, I went through some of the key things. There's definitely more to it. So what I will say, if there's things in here that are missing or things you learn, please email me and I can add it to the materials. But at the bottom here is the website to Roots to Revolution. You can find my email address. Please email me with any questions that you have. And then I linked the full text so you can download the playbook for free. It is 900 pages, so I don't know if they're going to read it all, but it's there if you want to check anything, check page numbers. But please share this with your networks. And if there's anything I can do, please let me know. And then last but not least, I am hosting an event for teachers and an event for us, for anyone. I mean, you all are very engaged in politics, but if you have some folks who, you know, are feeling reluctant, I'm doing this session about how people can get engaged called Breathe, We Can Do It. So, you know, getting people invested, and then a workshop for teachers about like ways and strategies to talk to students about the election and process this very emotional time. So please check those out in the chat, and just really thankful that you invited me in, and just thankful for all the community organizing that you're doing, and just appreciate us being in community together.
Thank you so very much. And thank you everybody for attending. I am going to put a quick plug in here. If you enjoyed this talk, we do have the Issues Committee is doing a Supreme Court discussion with constitutional law professor Steve Wormiel on July 31st at 6:30 over Zoom. And then they are also doing another discussion, Save Money While Saving the Planet, with the Inflation Reduction Act with Quentin Scott from CCAN on August 28th. So if you enjoyed this, please make sure to hit up one of our others. And you can find all of that information on the LCDC calendar. So please make sure to sign up for that. Thank you all again for attending. A special thank you to you, Jillian, for agreeing to do this for us. Absolutely love it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Just really appreciate all the hard work you're doing out there, and see you soon.
Have a good evening, everybody.